There we go. And welcome everyone. I'm Rachel Bremnes, Senior Provider Relations Manager on the Juniper team. And Stacy, do you want to introduce yourself quick? You're
I'm
muted.
Rohini from Seva.
Oh, sorry. I'm Stacy. I'm the Provider Relations Coordinator here at Juniper. I had muted myself and forgot I'm muted.
Thanks, Stacy. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We are going to be reviewing legal forms. And so we're having this training to review the legal form process. We've had a lot of questions come up over the last few months related to the changes made at the beginning of this year for the legal forms. So we wanted to take this opportunity just to walk through the changes and what they mean and what completed forms look like. So today we will be reviewing the changes to the forms and the new cadence, reviewing our different registration process options. So our 3 options for registrations, what forms are completed during which type of registration, and what forms need follow-up. And we will also be reviewing correct and completed legal forms. We do hope at the end to have time for questions. If there are any questions that we're not able to get to today or unable to answer, we will definitely respond to those in writing. Please feel welcome at any time during our conversation today to add questions into the chat. You can also raise your hand and unmute if that is your preferred way of asking your question. So first and foremost, let's review what changed from 2023 to 2024. So we made these changes based on new guidance from our legal counsel. So we do employ legal counsel for the Juniper network to help ensure that we are operating within best legal practice possible for our contracts with payers and as a healthcare entity. So one of the first changes was a signed acknowledgement for the privacy policy that is no longer needed. So we've learned from our legal counsel that it's sufficient that we have the privacy policy on our yourjuniper.org website. For new participants, the notice of privacy practices acknowledgement is still needed. So it is needed once per new registration, and that form is evergreen and stays with the participant's account in yourjuniper.org. There was a pretty significant change to the liability waiver and insurance authorization. Previously, that was needed once for every class, and our new legal guidance states that those forms are needed once every 12 months. The updated versions of these forms does contain new language to allow this new cycle. So it is important that participants complete the 2024 liability waiver and insurance authorization once in 2024 to begin this new cycle.
Registration once per class.
Did you have a question, Stacy?
No.
I meant Stacy Kolick.
Oh, no.
All right, so this is probably a grid you've seen before. This is a resource we created last year, and it was received feedback that it was helpful. So we updated it with the new legal form cadence to help illustrate what forms are needed when. So you'll see that the pre-surveys are still needed for every class. The acknowledgement of receipt of notice of privacy practices is needed once per new participant. So when someone signs up for a class for the very first time, they need to complete this. The liability waiver and the insurance authorization are needed once upon first registration and then every 12 months, or for existing participants, it's needed once in 2024 and then again every 12 months. And the registration form itself is needed once for initial registration and then updated as things change, such as insurance information, contact information, address, emergency contact, etc. This resource is available on the Juniper toolkit as a reference, and we will later on show you where to find this on the toolkit. So at what point are these forms required for data entry in yourjuniper.org? You will notice that we added new logic to yourjuniper.org to support the collection of these forms. So you'll notice that these forms are necessary for certain interactions in the back end of yourjuniper.org. For example, you will not be able to register someone by phone or re-register them into a class if they don't have a completed acknowledgement of notice of privacy practices. So that is needed for registration. And this is guidance from our legal counsel saying that in order to save and maintain that person's data, it's our responsibility to make sure they know how we're going to use their data. And we share that information through our notice of privacy practices. So that is why we need their acknowledgement. Now, there might be some situations when you're registering a participant, particularly if you're registering them by phone, where you might not be able to obtain a physical signature for the document. We do have an entity use only section for the notice of privacy practices, and we will be talking about how to use that a little bit later on to help with situations like telephone registrations. Additionally, you will not be able to enter attendance or survey information for a participant without the participant completing the liability waiver and insurance authorization and release of information. These forms are required for participation as they respectively release your organization from liability for any injuries incurred, and they enable us to bill and or share data with the individual's health plan for our sustainability as a network. If the participant did not complete these forms either on paper and you upload a paper copy or electronically, then you will need to mark them as did not attend for the attendance. There is no entity use only option for the liability waiver and insurance authorization per our legal counsel. So why are these two forms important? So the liability waiver, while it doesn't happen often, and our class leaders are always very, very cautious to help ensure that injuries do not happen, we do have situations where someone does fall in class or is injured in class. The liability waiver helps to prevent the participant from asking your organization to help with things like healthcare expenses related to any injury. For the insurance authorization, any situation where we might bill without a completed insurance authorization comes with significant financial and legal penalties that we want to avoid. So these forms are very important. Now that we've talked about the cadence for the legal forms and why, when they are needed and why, let's talk about our 3 registration options, what is collected automatically as part of registration, and what requires follow-up. Our 3 registration options are for the person to register themselves for a class on yourjuniper.org, for a person to call either the Juniper main line or the organization providing the class and be registered by phone, or for the person to complete their registration forms on paper. So those are the 3 options, and depending on if your class is in person or online or telephone, you might employ different registration options at different times. So we're going to walk through what happens automatically, what needs follow-up for each of these 3 options, where we will start with online. The yourjuniper.org website has been programmed to require acknowledgement of all 3 legal forms as part of registration. With this new legal form cadence, as legal forms expire, participants will automatically need to re-acknowledge them as part of any subsequent class registrations. So that will they will automatically be notified to do that. The item that the leader or organization needs to follow up on will be the surveys. That is not automatically part of the registration process. The participant can complete it online if they registered with an email address, or they can fill it out on paper, and depending on your organization and how the class is being delivered, you might have a unique preference as to how the participant does that. So you'll want to follow up and provide those instructions. Telephone. So sometimes participants call us to be registered by phone. In order to register someone, we must upload a completed acknowledgement of notice of privacy practices. Our legal responsibility with the notice of privacy practices is to make a good faith effort to obtain a signature. If we are not able to obtain a signature, we can complete the entity use only section of the notice of privacy practices. What we recommend for telephone registrations is that the person completing the registration complete the entity use only section of the notice of privacy practices acknowledgement. And doing so, you would document why you were unable to obtain a signature and what was offered to the participant as far as receiving a copy of the notice of privacy practices. We will have an example of how to do this later. So for telephone registrations, they do need follow-up with our instructions on completing the liability waiver, the insurance authorization and release of information, and the surveys. If the person is registered with an email address, they can log into yourjuniper.org to complete those forms online. Of course, there's also the option for them to complete them on paper, or by mail. So you'll want to provide instructions to the person as to what you prefer for that particular class. Okay, and finally, in person. So for in-person classes, while there is not an official stop gate like we have in yourjuniper.org, in theory, an organization should be able to obtain all 5 registration forms while they have that captive in-person audience. It is important to check all forms as they are turned in to ensure that they are completed correctly, as you can reach out to the person right away to let them know, hey, you missed the signature line, or you forgot to date this form, etc. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Stacy.
Great, thank you, Rachel. So for every legal form that you receive, we're going to ask that you have 4 things completed. Make sure that it's the current 2024 form, and we'll kind of show you how to get to the forms at the very end. We'll sort of navigate through that toolkit so that if you're not familiar with it, you kind of know where to find things. We're asking for a printed name, and the reason for a printed name is that often somebody's signature is way too hard to read, and then we don't know if the right legal form has been uploaded to the right person's file that way. So we are asking for a printed name and also a signature, of course, because it's a legal form, and then we also are requiring a date on that as well. We are going to send out copies of these slides with our recorded message, so you'll also get the links at the end. All right, next slide. So these 2 forms, the insurance authorization and release of information and the release and waiver of liability, these 2 forms have to be completed by the actual participant. So our privacy policy, there is an entity use only section, but we have had a little misunderstanding around this, and people have thought that they could complete this on behalf of the participants as well. And that is not true for these 2 forms. These have to be signed by the participant. So again, we just look that we have a 2024 copy and printed, signed, and dated on that one. All right, next slide. So this is our notice of privacy practices, and on the left side, this is the example if a participant fills the form out themselves. So make sure that they actually print their name. I know it's above those sections if they have a representative, and so that's easy to miss, but just double check that and get your sign and date there. And then on the right-hand side, this is the sample if you are filling out this notice of privacy practices as an entity rather than having the participant sign it. And you'll notice that even when you're filling out the entity use, at the top, you still do need to print in the person's name because there's not a place below to print that name. And then make sure that the person who is signing the form on behalf of the entity actually writes their name in there too. Sometimes we've just been getting maybe an initial or something, and that then we aren't able to trace that back and use that as a legal signature. And as Rachel said before, the narrative that we're putting in there is our documentation that we made a good faith effort to actually get that notice of privacy practices to the participant. So we've given the reason why we are signing on behalf of the participant there. And then we're saying what we did. So that's normally that you would offer to secure email or snail mail a copy of this out to the person, and then signing and dating. All right. We also, since the most often that you'll use this is when you're doing that over the phone. So you could also, in this narrative, add a reason that you did the registration over the phone, and you can also direct people to our webpage, the landing page, and at the bottom there's a link to our notice of privacy practices, so you can reference that as well. But definitely always offer to email or provide a copy to that participant. You could even provide a copy at the first day of class for that person as well. So, all right, next slide. Okay, this form to your left, this is the fillable PDF form that we've included now. And this form has a couple of things to watch for us to consider this a complete legal form. You'll notice that Rachel here signed her name with Adobe and actually has that signature block in there. And the reason she did that is because that signature has to be a signature that we can actually trace back to somebody and know that it was them that actually signed the form. So if somebody just types their name in there twice, even if they type it the second time in script, that isn't considered for a legal form identifiable back to the person who actually signed it. So, so if a person has Adobe Acrobat and they have that signature where they authenticate their signature and then they get that official stamp that designates that it's authenticated, like the screen is there on the right-hand side. Rachel had to enter a password to be able to get that signature to pop up. That's okay for people to do. The other thing that somebody could do is they could download the form and they could just use pen and paper and sign it and then re-upload that and send it securely back to you. But it does have to have some sort of signature rather than a typed in name there. It's kind of the main point of that. All right, next slide. This page has some of the sort of common things that we've seen. And so we wanted to kind of bring this forward. We do have, like Rachel talked about, new forms for 2024. And because they're is different language to cover that different cadence that we're collecting the forms, it's important that you use those new forms. It's happened, and I can understand why this has happened, but occasionally somebody will, sorry, I've got an error message popping up. Occasionally somebody will re-upload a form that's already been, a legal form that's already been uploaded. The example of this is that, say you have a class in January of 2024 and June of 2024, and the same participant is taking that January and June class. Well, they'll do their new privacy, notice of privacy practices in January, and they'll sign and date that and upload it. And then when it comes to June, you'll think, oh, okay, I don't have to have that person redo their form, which is true, but you don't need to re-upload it. In fact, if you re-upload it, that's going to cause trouble for us down the road, because that'll change the created date that you can see there. And that created date will then, the MIS will use that then to tabulate a new expiration date for that form. And so we want that created date to actually be accurate, because we want to use that to know when a form is getting to be a year old in the case of the insurance and liability, so that we can stay on top of it. So, we're looking for accuracy in that created date. Another common error has been uploading a form if somebody says that they're going to decline to provide. That'll again put in a created date for somebody, and I'll change in the on the class details page where it lists the legal forms, it'll change that legal form to yes, when in reality that person doesn't have a valid legal form. The other common error might be if you're having trouble uploading a file, it has to be no more than 5 megabytes. So your actual file size might be a little too big. So double check that if you're having trouble getting those forms to stick. If you're missing any one of the 3 signed legal forms for a participant, you won't be able to enter their attendance, but in that same section, you are able to check did not attend. And that's what we would like you to do for those participants. Even if they came to class, go ahead and mark them as did not attend. All right, next slide. So we have some changes that you're going to notice on the MIS to kind of help with some of this legal form collection. One is that you will be able to manually override that in the slide before where we had the created date. You're going to be able to actually enter the date for the form, and that is so the signature date and the upload date actually can match, so that we're not uploading a form in June, but it was really signed May 15th, so that we have an accurate date there. And then we're also moving our legal form columns in the class detail page. We're moving that a little bit to the left, closer to people's names, so that it's easier for you to be able to track who's actually missing legal forms. And on the next slide, we'll show you what it's going to look like. So the top is what it looks like now. And then on the bottom, you can see that we just moved those screens from the very end to more in the middle. All right, next slide. I'm going to hand it back to Miss Rachel now.
Thank you, Stacy. So I just need a moment to transition my screens. So we have quite a few resources available on the provider toolkit to help with navigating these changes and knowing what to do and having the correct legal forms. Our toolkit is toolkits.yourjuniper.org. The password, it is different from your juniper.org login, or sorry, yes, it is different from your juniper.org login password. Instead of having a password unique to you, we have a universal password for the toolkit site. So it's lowercase Juniper, uppercase now. So the toolkit, we really work to make this a place for all class leaders and provider contacts, anyone interacting with classes related to Juniper to be able to go to and find resources and tools to help them with their class delivery. So some important places to note related to this topic, the legal forms, is under class materials. So first off, on this page, we have down below under legal documents, we have individual copies of the legal forms with the signature pages. So if you only need the insurance authorization for a participant and none of the other forms, you can come to this page and get that form directly instead of pulling it from the class forms packet for the class. We also have the class formed grid. So this is one of the tools I showed you earlier, where you can see the frequency of the forms, what's needed for who and when, etc. Also, for those that are curious, we have our health plan contract and FAQ down below. So this gives you more insight into who has Juniper as a benefit for billing purposes. All right, under each of the classes, we have tools specific to that class. So for example, living well with diabetes. Down below, under course materials, we have first session forms and last session forms, as well as legal documents for packets prepared for the participants. So the first session form packet contains the registration, pre-survey liability waiver, insurance authorization, and notice of privacy practices. Specifically, the signature pages for these three legal documents. The idea being that this packet, the first session forms packet, for people registering in person, you give them the entire packet to complete and return back to you. Oftentimes with legal forms, it's an important courtesy to give participants a copy of the legal forms as a reference. So we do have the legal forms here as well for you to give those participants. The legal forms are available and they do not include the signature pages to help prevent confusion where the participants think they need to sign twice. So whenever we have a legal form change or a survey change, we always make sure that the most current forms are here on the toolkit for you. So please reference the toolkit to collect and to pull any class forms that you need. Something else that is also important is the HIPAA training. The HIPAA training, this is something that we need to complete once every 12 months. Anyone who interacts with class participants, maybe through registration, anyone who leads classes or has access to participant data in yourjuniper.org. We did add a couple steps to the training this year, some files to review based on questions that we received quite a bit about last year. So an email about, or a document about HIPAA compliant email, and also a document with guidance about sharing participant videos, photos, and stories. Stacey, is there anything else I should emphasize on the toolkit?
Not that I can think of. That was good.
I'll stop sharing. And now we are very curious and hoping to hear from you. Any questions you might have, anything you are hoping to have clarified. You prefer to ask anonymously? you could send me a private chat, and I promise I won't share your name. I know sometimes there are things that we feel like we should know, but we have a question about, and I
Rachel, I have a
hope,
question.
yeah, go ahead, Sam.
So we've had a number of people decide not to take classes because of the paperwork, and we've found a way to kind of talk them through the reasons for the paperwork, but some people can't get past some of the wording on the insurance authorization form, where it specifically states that they will be held responsible for payment, even though um, we tell them that they won't be billed and there's no cost. They feel like it's scammy. Um, and it kind of is instilling distrust. And just wondering if you have any um, guidance on that, or I know I've probably broken rules and just crossed it out an initial because I know that they won't be billed. Um, but I think like one of our partners had 10 people say that they weren't going to take classes out of 4 classes because of the form specifically. So just guidance or feedback or however you'd like to take it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that example, Sam. I'm sure you're not the only one, unfortunately, who's experienced something like that. And as I think it is different, like when I go to my clinic and I receive an insurance authorization that says I'm responsible for any charges that my insurance might not cover, I don't really bat an eye because that's something that I'm used to. But I think it is different. What we're doing here is different when we are a healthcare benefit in community, coming to people's apartments and churches, etc. So it does feel different. I think what you've done as far as explaining to people, the class is free. So if the class is free, that means there's no other charges. Whereas some of our classes do need to charge $100, $200. And if insurance isn't covering the class, the person will be asked to pay that. So that's a great first explanation. The only other idea I might add to what you're already doing is just trying to get further upstream with sharing with participants that this class is a healthcare benefit. So we will be asking for insurance authorizations and insurance information in the marketing materials. That does seem to help to set the stage where participants are expecting to receive those sorts of forms. And aren't as surprised the day of the session 0 or session 1 when they're being asked to fill them out.
I think the difference is, if I just might, as an instructor, because I'm the one usually receiving some of this FaceTime with the participants, to add on to the perspective, is they're not responding to the signature of this will be shown to insurance. It's the specific language around you will be responsible for the payment. Because you're right, Rachel, when we go to a clinic, we know we might have a copay or we might have this isn't the reality of these classes that they're going to have a copay. So that's the actual concern, is that we're telling them one thing, but they're signing something that says something different. And that I think it's good that they have those questions and concerns. That's why we want them to be signing it, because so what would we say to that?
Well, there are classes that do charge a fee. So for those classes, it is important that we have that language in there so the person understands that if the class isn't a benefit, they will be asked to pay.
Is there anything as instructors where we could know which classes those are? Because really that would just be an easy message to the participant that this is a network of providing, community-based wellness classes, and this particular class does not fall into one that's being. So I've just had to give them generically, like, this is not a class. And that it's the language, they're still signing off on it. But I guess that would be helpful to know.
Sure.
that language around there are classes where there would be a cost, and then this is not one of them.
Yes, and there isn't, that's a great point, Lynn, and there isn't a specific rule around which classes can and cannot charge fees. We allow all organizations to charge their own, determine their own fees, of course. That being said, the trend is that most diabetes prevention program classes are the ones charging fees for people to participate. The reason being is just for internal operation knowledge, there's less grant funding available or no grant funding available for diabetes prevention program. They're really relying on the claims through Medicare and Medicaid and the commercial contracts we have. So therefore, having that insurance information is critical. There's a few exceptions to that trend. We have some Tai Chi instructors that ask for contributions and others. So it varies more by organization, I would say, than by program, but just to help give you some ideas, Lynn, if that makes it easier for the participants to understand why that language is in there.
That's very helpful, and I actually see that that could be a segue into, we would talk about the sliding fee donation scale that we have, or however that looks within our delivery operation organization. So that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, Lynn, I don't know if this is helpful too, but one of the explanations for the diabetes prevention program too is that it's sessions spread out through a whole year. So that's, I think people then automatically think, oh yeah, that's a
Doing
a
good.
different cost to that too, so. Candy, did you have a comment?
I do see a question from Jane in the chat asking, how can I delete when I upload the wrong file for a signed form? If you ever find that you upload maybe a signed form for participant A up into participant B's account, or for participant A, you upload the insurance authorization and the liability waiver spot, please reach out to Stacy and I. We have the ability to delete those. You can upload the correct form and we can look and make sure the incorrect form is deleted for you. So just send us an email with a link to that person's profile in yourjuniper.org, and we're glad to help you with that. These are really good questions. I always love the questions because as much as Stacy and I try to brainstorm, but there's always other ones that we just haven't thought of because everyone here interacts with the forms differently. Are there any other questions? Again, if you prefer to ask like semi-anonymously, you could send me a private chat.
So this may be a question that I should know, but I do have someone that helps me with registration, so I'm just going to ask it in case anyone else. So let's say we decide to go the paper route, and this is, let's use an example that I'm living through right now. So we have an individual that is joining us on session class 2 because someone else dropped out. We now have room, and we had her come to the class, and I know Rachel, you know who I'm thinking of. And she came, and I realized the forms I had didn't include the registration, the actual. So if I'm going to print that out, you showed us where that is on the toolkit. What am I doing with that registration? Am I taking it and then putting it in manually myself? What are my options there?
Yeah, so if the class is already in progress, the participant no longer has the option to register themselves online. So you
Right.
will need to take their registration down on paper or over the phone and manually enter it into yourjuniper.org.
Okay, so I can do that. We can do that, and it'll create the ID for them, even though it's not them doing it. Okay, perfect. That's what I thought, but I thought the new system might be different, and I need to. Thank you.
What other questions are there?
No more questions?
Or
Feel free,
scenarios?
yeah, feel free to, as things come up when you're working on your classes, don't hesitate to send Rachel or I an email. Yeah, I always feel welcome to do that.
Yes, we appreciate when you reach out so we can help you think through scenarios and the best way to approach them. Because we want everyone to be successful in this. The legal form collection is really important for our long-term goals of being a health plan benefit for everyone in Minnesota. So this is a skill set we want to develop over time. Also, while we can't change the language in the legal forms, if you have any suggestions around formatting, if you're noticing any trends with participants where they tend to fill out XYZ incorrectly, we can make formatting changes to the forms.
If you run into an issue on the MIS, again, don't hesitate to shoot us an email about that, because chances are other people are having that problem too, and we may not know about it yet. And so feel free to send us as much information as you want about what issue that you're having. And if you can take a screenshot of if you get an error message, that helps us out too. So.
Right, well, hearing no other questions, I think we can wrap up our meeting today. So a reminder that the legal forms, they are required for reimbursement in 2024. So we really want to make sure we have these entered correctly. Stacy and I are here to help you, so please reach out to us. If you want us to double check a class before you submit a reimbursement request and mark it as complete, we're very, very glad to do so. We are here to support you in this change. Thank you everyone for joining us. We will send out the recording and the slide deck for those that were unable to join, or if you just want to listen again just rehear the information again. We plan to find a spot on the provider toolkit to save this training and the slide deck for future reference as well. Thanks so much, everyone.